Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. My name is Mahua Nigurkar. I'm Assistant Professor with the School of Social Work, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Today we are going to cover a very important topic, and that is social work with children. This is part 2 of the module, Social Work with Children. This module is part of the paper on fields of practice. Now in part 1, and I hope you have read part 1 of this module, Social Work with Children, we have covered topics such as who is a child, what is childhood, different terms and terminologies and perspectives and approaches of working with children. Moving on to an introduction to the module. So what will this module cover? The module Social Work with Children, Part 1, as I mentioned earlier, has covered a basic understanding of child and childhood and other related aspects. This module, Part 2, Social Work with Children, includes discussion around the following areas. Why is working with children an important field of practice? This is something probably some of us already know and well aware of, but it would be important to reinforce some of the points again. Secondly, when we are working with children, what would be the range of work that we can do as social workers? The third point that this module will cover is the different categories of children who require special attention. Then this module will also briefly touch upon how do we respond to vulnerability and marginalization. How do different stakeholders, right from the family to the state, respond to issues of vulnerability and marginalization. And finally, the module will summarize the main points of the discussion. Now we will move on to this whole aspect of why is working with children an important field of practice? And I'm sure the answers or most of the answers are already known to us, but nonetheless I'm reiterating some of the important points that I think we need to consider when we are working with children, and why is it important to work with children? Now there are several reasons. One of the reasons is powerlessness and defenselessness that many children may be experiencing in society. Due to the child's young age and evolving capacities, many of the children are not in a position to protect themselves. Adult power, the equation between adults and children, also becomes a factor in their feeling and sense of powerlessness and defenselessness. When a young person is powerless and defenseless, there is a higher likelihood of vulnerability, abuse and exploitation. And that is why we as adults either need to mobilize children, make them more aware of their rights, empower them. Of course, empowerment will be age appropriate, and as adults we need to mobilize other adults to ensure that there is a safe environment for children to grow up in. Another reason, a very important reason why we need to work with children is this whole adult approach to children. If you look around and you see the adult approach to children, there would be a range of approaches. Adults can be very authoritarian. They can have this whole understanding that because they have led many more years of life, they have more experience, the child is only supposed to listen to them as a spectator, the child is not supposed to participate, and this whole cliche that adults know best what is for children may not always work for all children, and all adults may not really know what is best for children at all points in time. So too much of authority, too much of discipline, too much of this whole notion that children have to be only passive recipients of service or passive recipients of instructions does not really help a child to develop a thinking mind, does not really help a child to grow up with self-confidence. And some of these authoritarian approaches of adults to children also has larger structural dimensions of power between men and women, the power relations between men and women, how young children are looked at in the family, how girl child is looked at within the family. how children with special needs may be looked at within the family. So many such situations make children more vulnerable as they do not have an opportunity to express themselves, and even if they come under situations of abuse and exploitation, many times they may not know where to go and where to seek redressal. Now, as social workers, field of practice, social work with children becomes important not just to work directly with children, but also to generate greater awareness on childhood. That children are not mini adults, and children do not have to necessarily only remain as passive recipients within the family, within the school, and so on and so forth. We as adults need to give them an age appropriate space, encourage them to develop their own thinking, encourage them towards the path of more well-informed decision making, and thereby a process of empowerment. Now, one more approach or one more reason why we need to work with children is also the inherent discriminatory structures in society. There is inequality, there is discrimination, there is lack of access to resources, and these make large groups of families, these make large groups of communities vulnerable, and within those communities the youngest members of those communities become that much more vulnerable, that much more marginalized, and the powerlessness and the defenselessness that I was mentioning earlier further gets aggravated. So working with children is not only micro work with children or direct work with children. Working with children is also not only generating awareness about children's issues and child rights and child protection. Working with children also entails campaigning and advocating against these inherent unequal structures in society. Then children also comprise a large number in society. It's the sheer numbers of children that are in society, vis-a-vis the resources available for them, vis-a-vis the care and nurturance that we are being able to give to them. And that is why one of the reasons why there is such a large number of vulnerable children in society, because the number of young people we have in society and the number of services and resources available to them, if you look at the census data, if you look at other statistics, you will find that so many children are outside the so-called mainstream society of resources and entitlements. Finally, fulfillment of child rights and child well-being also reflects on the state and society's willingness and commitment towards their youngest members. So, as a field of practice, working with children becomes very, very critical. And these are only some of the reasons I have enumerated. I am sure when you read more and when you analyze more of children's situations, you will see there are so many other reasons why we need to urgently work with children. Now, moving on, there would be many other ways of looking at social work with children as a field of practice. A happy and healthy child will not only be enjoying their childhood, but will also grow up to be a constructive, happy, and productive adult. Then there are certain groups of children who require special attention and care, and you will need specific state intervention programs for them. Let us say, for example, children with disability, or let us say, for example, the girl child, or let us say, for example, child victims of child sexual abuse, or let us say, for example, child survivors of disasters. Now, when such situations occur in the lives of a children, you will require specific programs and schemes for them. Inadequate state response also necessitates consistent child-related advocacy programs and campaigns to generate greater awareness, sensitivity, or responsiveness towards child-related issues. Children are growing, and there are certain critical needs which require timely fulfillment. Young persons who have not completed 18 years of age and are vulnerable to inappropriate behaviors, let's say, for example, to addiction, to offense charges, also require timely direction and attention to be able to steer their lives. So there are a variety of very serious considerations why we need to work with children as a field of practice within the context of social work. Now let us move on. We move on to another topic of the wide and the diverse range of work that we can do when we work with children. Now, generally speaking, in broad terms, if we were to look at three large areas, then one could look at the whole developmental aspect of working with children, preventive work, and therapeutic care. Now, therefore, it is not necessary, as I mentioned earlier, that all children may be vulnerable due to their young age and evolving capacities, but it is not necessary that all children are being abused or exploited or marginalized. Nonetheless, children will require a lot of different kinds of developmental programs and activities to ensure that they grow optimally well. So all children may not necessarily require social work intervention, especially those children who are growing up in an atmosphere of adult support and adequate facilities. For example, let's say programs undertaken in schools to encourage talent, promote a spirit of cooperation and teamwork among children, building the self-confidence of the child, building leadership capacities, preventive programs for exam stress, life skills training for adolescents and older children are different ways to enhance child's capacity and potential, different ways to enhance child's optimal development. Children who are experiencing some kind of difficulty in studies or unable to concentrate or could be experiencing some kind of mental health related challenges, they may require specific mental health programs, they may require specific therapeutic care under mental health experts and other professionals. Now there are also different kinds of preventive programs. For example, let us say the midday meal scheme. Among its many advantages which the midday meal scheme has, it also prevents school dropout. So programs conducted in communities on general awareness on areas such as education, health, nutrition, child marriage, vocational guidance, addiction, offenses, not only creates awareness within the community, not only creates awareness among the participants, including children who may be attending these training programs or discussions or meetings or group sessions, but it can also prevent children from getting pushed into situations of vulnerability such as child labor, child marriage, child trafficking, etc. So the whole point is that there is a wide range of diverse activities, programs, interventions and strategies that we can work with children. We can also design programs along with children. We can take their views and design programs that are relevant for them. So there is this whole aspect of preventive work which needs to be emphasized on, because rather than waiting for children to get into situations of violence, abuse, exploitation and neglect, if we proactively design preventive programs across communities, across different groups of children, then so many children will be prevented from facing such distress and such abuse in their lives. Now let us move on to yet another small topic, and that is categories of children requiring special attention. Though all children can be vulnerable due to their young age, certain situations, social realities make some groups of children more vulnerable than others. Categorizing children into different groups does not mean that such children are having only one particular kind of vulnerability. There may be a combination of different vulnerabilities. For example, let us say Simmi, aged 16 years, may be working as well as a school dropout, may be taking adult-like responsibilities in the house. So there are different situations that a young girl child of 16 years old may be faced with. Another example could be that of, let's say, for example, Rohil, who is aged 12 years, has got separated from his family at the railway station, was lured by a stranger, beaten, kept locked, and being forced to participate in child pornography. So categorizing children children into different groups of vulnerable children ensures that specific attention is given to those unique situations of vulnerability and specific programs are designed. This does not negate the fact that the child's vulnerability could be reflected within one category of vulnerability or across different category of vulnerability and vulnerable children. Now, the term vulnerability also at times has been critiqued that if we are continuously referring to children as vulnerable, then we are again reinforcing the fact that there will be certain group of children who will be deprived of resources and who will be discriminated upon. And as society, we have to design intervention programs for them. So there are different ways of looking at vulnerability. The child rights way or the child rights approach of looking at children who are in difficult situations would be looking at more in terms of child rights, child entitlements, and helping children progress towards this whole process of well-informed decision making, critical thinking skills, and empowerment. But for a child to be able to do that, you not only need support within the family or school, but you need support at the larger state and structural levels too. Now let us move on to the different categories of vulnerable children. If we look at the different categories of vulnerable children, and you would have come across several of these categories, you would be having children who have been orphaned or destitute. You would be having children who are street living or street connected. You will be seeing children working into exploitative child labor situations. You will find children in begging. You will find children lured into addiction. You will find children in situations of crime. You will find that you will be reading about missing children, trafficked children, children in conflict areas, children being pushed into becoming child soldiers, child survivors of sexual abuse, children who have seen or witnessed riots, who have witnessed disasters. Their entire family has got affected and impacted by those riots and disasters. Children with special needs such as disability. So there are different kinds of groups of children who are facing different situations of violence, exploitation, abuse, and neglect. And as I mentioned earlier, that categorizing children into different groups is not stigmatizing them or labeling them or looking at them as victims or passive recipients of now adult intervention. Rather, it is to ensure that specific needs of those groups of children, which has made them vulnerable or marginalized, can be addressed in a very, very effective manner. Now, if we look at orphaned and destitute children, these are children who could have either lost their parents due to different reasons, or maybe the whereabouts or information about their family is not known. Now, many a times children become destitute also due to desertion and abandonment. So you need a range of measures to address children who do not have family or nothing much is known about their family. Many of these children are missing children also. So within missing children also you will find that parents have registered police complaints and they do not know their whereabouts of their child. You will also find children growing up in children's institutions where the child is there in an institution but nothing is known about their family or their relatives. Now, for such children, family tracing becomes critical. Finding out where their family is, and in the absence of the family, what kind of substitute care, what kind of alternative care is possible for these groups of children. So there are a range of options. Such children may go into adoption, where the child's right to a family gets legally ensured. Such children can also go into foster care. If relations are found, if extended family members are found, they are willing to take care of that family, but economic reasons may be preventing them from taking care of that child, then the child may also go into extended family, kinship care arrangements through sponsorship. Now, when non-institutional services or alternative care facilities, for one reason or the other, the children are not able to get them, or maybe it has not worked well for a particular child, then many of these children grow up in institutional care. So social work becomes very critical with children growing up without family, with children growing up without family support, children growing up in institutional care, and you will need specific measures and intervention programs for them. Let us take another example, and that is street living or street connected children. There are many children that we see all around us in public spaces, at bus stations, near railway stations. They are there physically visible to all of us, and yet they are marginalized, because though they are there in so-called public spaces, they do not have basic access to shelter, to protection, to health, to education, nutrition, and there are high likelihood of abuse and exploitation on the streets. Now, there are different kinds of children who become street connected or street living. There could be children who have come there due to economic reasons, so they may be working, they may be supporting their family, either families who either live close by or maybe families living in another place. There could be also children who, to different reasons, different strife within the home, was compelled to leave home and now is on the streets. And ironically, streets, which is a transit point for us, we use the streets to move from one point to other to reach our destination. Ironically, unfortunately, for young people, it becomes a home because they have nowhere else to go. So for street living and street connected children, we again need to look at those vulnerabilities. We need to look at what are the critical needs of vulnerabilities and design programs accordingly. So we may have contact centers, such children may go into institutional care. There are several state programs, there are NGO measures, and so on and so forth. In part 3 of the module, we may delve into some more of the aspect of social work intervention. Then if you look at child trafficking, if you look at children who are riot victims, if you look at children who are victims of disaster, if you look at children in addiction, if you look at children who have got into situations of crime, each situation of vulnerability leads to a certain impact. So children who are into exploitative child labor, all their rights are being violated. The child is being deprived from education, the child is being deprived from nutrition, from care, from recreation, from rest, and sometimes the physical hazards of child labor also physically impacts the child and is hazardous to the child's health and other physical aspects of his life. So exploitative child labor is also very, very harmful, and the basic child rights exploitation, basic child rights violations are happening. So when we look at child labor, which is probably among the oldest social problems across the world, then we will need to design intervention program not for children who are already into situations of labor, but preventing children from getting into situations of child labor in the first place. Now, if you look at child trafficking, or if you look at human trafficking, it is an organized crime. Children are being trafficked for situations like begging, pushed into prostitution, child pornography, exploitative child labor, forced into child marriage. Now, for an organized crime, for us to address interventions for an organized crime like trafficking, you will require a multidisciplinary effort among the lawmakers, the policymakers, the social work interventions, the social workers, and so on and so forth. So there are different categories of vulnerable children, and we will need to address specific measures for them. Now moving on, how do we respond to vulnerability and marginalization? Part 3 of the module will cover more details about this, but to give you a very brief kind of an overview, the state has different intervention measures and strategies. The overarching framework for all our policies and laws is the constitutional provisions, which are meant for basic fundamental rights of people, and there are specific articles which relate to children. Then there are policies for children, there are laws, general protective laws meant for all including children, and specific child related laws. There are also schemes meant for different aspects of working with children. Two of the largest schemes would be the Integrated Child Development Scheme and the Integrated Child Protection Services. There are several other schemes as well. Then you have specific programs for specific groups of vulnerable children. So moving on, and to summarize this class, what I would like to say is that social work with children becomes an important field of practice. Once we develop an understanding on who is a child, what is childhood, different approaches of looking at child and childhood, we also need to be very, very sure of why working with children is very important, and which we have dealt in this discussion. We also need to understand the different ways we can respond to vulnerability, different categories of vulnerable and marginalized children, and what can be done about them. In part 3 of the module, we'll further delve into scope of social work intervention and role of the social worker. Thank you.